Jonathan had always believed that life had a way of balancing itself out. You work hard, you get results. You treat people well, they treat you well in return. And if you marry a woman who claims you're the best thing that ever happened to her, then naturally, she remains loyal. That was the general equation he had always followed. It was simple. It made sense. Unfortunately, life didn't care about Jonathan's personal equations. Life, as it turned out, had a much better sense of humor than he did. It all started with the basement. Now, most men dream of having a basement that serves a higher purpose than just housing the water heater and an alarming collection of holiday decorations. Some dream of a man cave, a home gym, or even just a quiet space where they can pretend to be fixing things while actually doing nothing at all. Jonathan's basement, however, had none of that. What it did have was a broken light bulb, an old treadmill that made a noise like a dying animal whenever it was turned on, and, as of that particular evening, a strange little discovery. He wasn't even supposed to be in the basement. He had planned on spending his evening like any other responsible adult, sitting on the couch, drinking a beer, and Googling things he would never actually buy. But Emma had insisted that one of the storage boxes needed to be brought up, and despite his best efforts to remind her that they hadn't touched those boxes in years, she had given him that look. The one that said, "I could do it myself, but if I do, I'll make sure to dramatically sigh every 5 minutes until you ask what's wrong." So, down he went. He found the box, of course. That part was easy. What wasn't easy was the other thing he found, the thing that made him pause for a solid minute, his brain struggling to rearrange itself around what he was seeing. It was another box, tucked behind the old exercise bike that served no purpose other than holding laundry that never made it upstairs. The box itself wasn't unusual, just an ordinary cardboard thing, the kind that every household seemed to have an infinite supply of. But inside, well, inside was a wedding dress. Now, one might assume that a wedding dress in a married couple's basement is a perfectly normal thing. Sentimental, even. Except for one small detail. Jonathan had never seen this dress before in his life. And he was fairly certain that, historically speaking, people only tended to have one wedding dress per marriage. So, either Emma had developed a secret habit of collecting bridal gowns for no apparent reason, or there was a piece of information about his own life that he was currently missing. Naturally, Jonathan did what any rational man would do. He closed the box, stood there for another full minute, and tried to convince himself that this was somehow not his problem. Unfortunately, it was his problem, because the moment he turned around, Emma was standing at the top of the basement stairs, arms crossed, her expression as unreadable as ever. "You found it," she said, her voice remarkably casual for someone whose secret storage had just been discovered. Jonathan let out a slow breath. "Yep." Silence. "Are we playing a game where I'm supposed to pretend I understand what's going on?" he asked, crossing his arms as well, because two could play the overly casual game. "Because I'd love a hint. Maybe something in the form of a multiple-choice question." Emma sighed, stepping down one step. "It's just a dress, Jonathan." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, sure. Just a dress. You know, the kind of thing every woman keeps hidden in a dusty box in the basement, far away from the actual wedding dress she wore. Makes perfect sense." Her expression tightened just slightly. "It's not what you think." "Oh, good," he said, nodding. "Because what I think is that I've either married a woman with an unusual hobby, or I'm about to hear an explanation that's going to make me regret ever agreeing to go down these stairs." Emma hesitated. Jonathan knew that hesitation. He had seen it before. It was the same hesitation she had when she accidentally dropped his favorite coffee mug, but told him it must have cracked on its own. It was the same hesitation she had when she swore she hadn't seen his missing sweatshirt, only for him to later find it in the trunk of her car, where she had apparently been using it as a backup picnic blanket. Emma was many things, beautiful, smart, annoyingly good at winning arguments, but a convincing liar? Not so much. Jonathan exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You know what? I'll make this easy for you. Just answer one question. One very simple question." She didn't say anything, just watched him warily. He took a step closer. "Whose wedding dress is it?" More silence. Which was interesting, because there was no logical reason for that to be a difficult question. Jonathan tilted his head, giving her a look. "Emma." She swallowed. "It's..." Then she stopped. Then she did something truly fascinating. She laughed. Not a normal laugh. Not the kind of laugh that suggests something is actually funny. No, this was the kind of laugh people did when their brains were scrambling for time, when they were trying to convince themselves that whatever was happening wasn't actually happening. Jonathan stared at her, unimpressed. She stopped laughing. Then, finally, she said it. It's mine. Jonathan blinked. Come again. She shifted slightly, avoiding his eyes. It's mine, she repeated. Jonathan looked at her, then at the box, then back at her. Right, he said slowly. And just for fun, when exactly did you plan on wearing it? Silence. Then, well, technically, I already did. Jonathan had never been the type to experience genuine out-of-body moments, but he suspected this was the closest he would ever come. He took another step closer. Emma, he said, his voice calm in a way that wasn't actually calm at all. Why do I have a very strong feeling that what you're about to tell me is something I'm going to deeply regret hearing? She bit her lip. He exhaled. Then, finally, she said it. Because, Jonathan, she murmured, you weren't the first person I married. Jonathan stared at her. The basement was quiet. Somewhere in the distance, the old treadmill let out a weak, pathetic creak. Jonathan let out a breath. Oh, well, that's just fantastic, he said cheerfully. Tell me, do I at least get a consolation prize for making it to the second round of marriage without being informed? Emma winced. I was going to tell you. Were you? Yes. Oh, good, he nodded. So glad to hear that. Any particular decade you were planning on choosing for that announcement? Or was I supposed to find out after you accidentally left a third wedding dress in the basement? Emma sighed. And just like that, Jonathan realized he was only just getting started on uncovering the rest of the story. Jonathan didn't consider himself an expert on marriage, but he was fairly certain that if a person had been previously married, that information should have come up at some point before exchanging vows the second time. It was basic courtesy, really, right up there with saying excuse me when you sneeze and not taking the last slice of pizza without offering it first. So, naturally, when Emma stood in front of him, admitting that she had, just casually, no big deal, been married to someone else before him, Jonathan felt it was a good time to sit down before he did something radical, like develop a stress-induced allergy to his own existence. So, he started, making a vague motion with his hand. I should just assume this was one of those, oh, I forgot to mention it, situations? Like when you don't tell someone you once broke your arm in the 5th grade. That kind of minor detail? Emma had the decency to look at least somewhat uncomfortable. Jonathan, you. No, he interrupted, nodding. I get it. Some things just slip the mind. Like previous marriages. Totally understandable. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I didn't tell you because it didn't matter. Jonathan made a noise that was somewhere between a scoff and a laugh, but mostly just sounded like a man whose last remaining brain cell had decided to quit on the spot. Oh, of course, he said, leaning back against the old treadmill that had betrayed him by still existing. Yeah, why would it matter? I mean, it's not like marriage is a big deal. People get married all the time. Some even like to mention it to their spouses. But hey, different strokes. Emma crossed her arms. It was a long time ago. And tell me, just for fun, was it also in this country? Or should I be checking international records for any other surprises? She exhaled sharply, clearly annoyed. It was years before I met you. It ended. I moved on. It didn't seem relevant. Jonathan clapped his hands together, nodding. Right. Because irrelevant is exactly how most people describe marriage. That's why wedding vows traditionally end with, doesn't really matter. Emma rolled her eyes. Can we stop with the sarcasm for a second? Jonathan considered it, then decided absolutely not. Nope. Sorry. That's my only coping mechanism at the moment, and I feel like I'm owed at least 15 more minutes of it. Emma's expression flattened. Are you done? Oh, definitely not, he said cheerfully. In fact, I'm just getting started. So, tell me, how many other secret weddings should I be aware of? Are we in the single digits, at least? Or am I about to find out we need a family reunion with a bunch of long-lost ex-husbands? She threw up her hands. It was one marriage, Jonathan. One. And it was years ago. It's not like it affects us. Jonathan stared at her. Then at the wedding dress still sitting in the box. Then back at her. Right, he said, rubbing his jaw. So, riddle me this, Emma. If it doesn't affect us, then why exactly do you have this dress in our basement? Emma hesitated. Jonathan let that silence stretch, because nothing, in the entire history of humanity, had ever been more incriminating than that half-second of hesitation. Emma, he said, his voice dangerously calm, what exactly am I about to find out here? She shifted uncomfortably. It's complicated. Oh, I bet it is, Jonathan said, nodding. I mean, I love a good complication. Really, I do. You know what else is complicated? Solving a Rubik's Cube while skydiving. But, oddly enough, people tend to talk about it if that's something they've done. Emma sighed again, pinching the bridge of her nose like she was the one suffering here. Jonathan, you're making a bigger deal out of this than necessary. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. Oh, I promise you, I have not even begun to make a big deal out of this. More silence. Then Emma did that thing where she closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling like she was gathering patience. Jonathan had never trusted that look. Finally, she opened her eyes, exhaling slowly. It's from him. Jonathan stared at her, waiting for more. When she didn't continue, he blinked. I'm sorry, did I miss the part where that sentence became self-explanatory? Emma clenched her jaw. Jonathan. No, I really want to know, he said, nodding. Him? Who's him? Are we talking about an ex-husband here? Or have you also secretly been corresponding with Batman? She shot him a glare, but he could see the way her fingers twitched slightly. Jonathan suddenly had the terrible, sinking feeling that he had underestimated just how much this situation was about to derail his entire life. And then, before he could even stop himself, he asked the question that probably should have come a lot sooner. Emma, he said slowly. Where is he now? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. And then, finally, she said it. Back in town. Jonathan didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Back in town, he repeated. As in, moved back and is minding his business? Or as in, actively in our lives in some way I'm about to deeply regret? Emma shifted again, and Jonathan had his answer before she even spoke. It's complicated. Jonathan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Emma, everything about this is complicated. But do you know what isn't complicated? Just telling your husband when your ex-husband randomly pops back into existence. Emma crossed her arms again. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react like this. Jonathan threw his hands up. Oh, well, forgive me for not clapping and throwing confetti at this delightful revelation. She sighed again. Jonathan, No, don't even bother, he said, shaking his head. Because I have a fantastic feeling that whatever comes out of your mouth next is just going to make my night even worse. She hesitated again. And Jonathan, for the first time since finding that box, seriously considered whether he should just start digging a hole in the backyard and living in it permanently. But, unfortunately, he still had to ask. Emma, he said, rubbing his face. Please, for the sake of my last remaining ounce of sanity, just tell me. What else am I missing? Emma inhaled deeply. And then, finally, she said the words that would officially push Jonathan into an entirely new level of disbelief. He's been at the house. Jonathan blinked. Then blinked again. And then, slowly, deliberately, he sat down on the treadmill, buried his face in his hands, and muttered, I swear to everything, if you tell me he used that treadmill, I'm filing for divorce on principle. Jonathan had always been aware that his wife made questionable decisions. She once bought a treadmill, claiming she would use it every morning, and then proceeded to store laundry on it for the next 5 years. She insisted on labeling their spice jars, even though she never cooked. She once convinced herself that she could fix their neighbor's teenage son, who was on his way to becoming a minor criminal, only for that same kid to later steal their garden hose. But this was a new level of what on earth were you thinking? Jonathan leaned back against the treadmill, staring at Emma like she had just casually confessed to adopting a new identity and living a double life in Canada. He's been at the house, he repeated, because sometimes, when people say insane things, it's good to give them a second chance to realize how insane it actually sounds. Emma had the nerve to look annoyed. Don't start. Jonathan let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, no, I definitely want to start. In fact, I'd love to start, continue, and finish this entire disaster of a conversation. So go ahead, Emma. Let's hear it. Why exactly has your ex-husband been inside our house? She folded her arms, shifting her weight like she was gearing up for an argument she somehow thought she had a chance of winning. He needed a favor. Jonathan stared at her. Oh, well, that clears everything up. I love when my wife's ex-husband randomly shows up needing favors. That's actually my favorite part of marriage. She sighed, rubbing her forehead. Jonathan, don't be dramatic. Jonathan pointed at her. No, you don't get to say that. You don't get to be the one sighing right now. You hid an entire previous marriage from me, then let your ex-husband waltz into our house, and now I'm supposed to just sit here and be the reasonable one. Emma rolled her eyes. It wasn't a big deal. Jonathan clapped his hands together. Oh, great. Love that. Tell me, Emma, At what point did you sit down and think, you know who shouldn't know about this? The man who actually lives in this house and pays half the mortgage. She exhaled sharply. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Jonathan pointed at the box with the wedding dress still inside it. Says the woman hoarding memorabilia from a marriage she forgot to mention. She pressed her lips together, visibly irritated. I didn't forget. Oh, good. You consciously chose not to tell me. So glad we cleared that up. Emma threw up her hands. It was years ago. Why would I bring it up? Just to hear you make a big thing out of it. Jonathan let out a slow breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. Okay, fine. Let's pretend for a second that I'm just some unreasonable, overly dramatic husband who reacts way too much to discovering that his wife's ex-husband has been inside their home without his knowledge. Let's humor that idea. Now explain to me, Emma, what exactly was this favor he needed? She hesitated. Jonathan felt his last bit of patience shrivel up and die. Emma. She exhaled. He needed a place to stay for a couple of nights. Jonathan was still. Very still. The kind of stillness that happened when a person had reached a level of disbelief so extreme that their body simply shut down to process it. Then, finally, you let your ex-husband stay in our house? Emma groaned. Jonathan, you're making this into something it's not. Jonathan threw up a hand. Oh, I bet I am. Because obviously, when a woman lets a man she used to be married to crash at her house without telling her current husband, there's definitely no reason to assume it's a problem. She crossed her arms. He had nowhere else to go. Jonathan let out a sharp laugh. Oh, well, in that case, by all means. What else are we running here? A charity? Should we put up flyers? Free lodging for men who used to be legally bound to my wife. She clenched her jaw. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Emma? She hesitated again, and Jonathan had officially lost any remaining belief that this wasn't about to get way worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed. He was going through a rough time. He just needed somewhere to crash while he figured things out. Jonathan dragged a hand down his face. Okay, listen, I'm a very tolerant person. I put up with your obsession with buying throw pillows we don't need. I put up with the fact that you think there's a right way to load a dishwasher. I even put up with that phase where you thought you could do your own haircut. But this is a lot, Emma. This is a lot even for you. She groaned. You're acting like I had some secret plan to hide it from you forever. Well, considering the fact that I found out by accident in the basement of all places, I think you might need to rework your definition of not hiding things. Emma exhaled slowly, and Jonathan could tell she was trying not to snap. Jonathan, listen. I'm telling you now. That should count for something. Jonathan clapped his hands together. Oh, right. I forgot. Honesty points can be cashed in after you get caught. That's how that works. She gave him a deadpan look. Can you just let me explain? Oh, absolutely, he said, waving his hand dramatically. By all means. I love explanations. They're my second favorite thing, right after not having my home turned into an Airbnb for ex-husbands. She sighed again, clearly deciding to just push forward. Look, he was in town for work, but something fell through with his living situation. It was supposed to be temporary. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. Was supposed to be? Emma shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan groaned, rubbing his face. Oh, no. Oh, no, no, no. Emma, tell me exactly how long he was here. Silence. Then, very quietly, about a month. Jonathan's jaw nearly hit the floor. A month. She flinched. Jonathan. A month? Emma? Are you kidding me? It wasn't planned, she insisted. It just happened. One day turned into two, then a week, and oh, fantastic. So he was gradually squatting in my house. That's even better. Emma threw up her hands. Jonathan, I don't know what you want me to say. Jonathan let out a dry, humorless laugh, shaking his head. Oh, I don't know. Maybe something like, hey, honey, by the way, my ex-husband is staying with us. Hope that's cool. She groaned. It wasn't that simple. Jonathan exhaled sharply, pressing his fingers against his temples. Emma, you cannot be this oblivious. How did you think this was going to go? Did you think I was just never going to find out? She hesitated. And that was when Jonathan realized, whatever he had discovered so far, it wasn't even the worst of it. Jonathan had been in some frustrating situations before. He had once spent 3 hours assembling a bookshelf only to realize he had built it upside down. He had gotten stuck in a bathroom stall at work because the lock jammed, forcing him to climb over like some kind of escaped convict. He had even once attended a dinner party where a man spent 45 minutes explaining cryptocurrency to him without taking a single breath. But none of those experiences compared to standing in his basement, staring at his wife, and realizing that every single word coming out of her mouth was making his life worse by the second. A month. Jonathan repeated, because sometimes you just had to hear the nonsense again to make sure you weren't hallucinating. Your ex-husband was in our house for a month? Emma crossed her arms, looking defensive in a way that made Jonathan want to lie down on the floor and give up on the concept of logic entirely. It wasn't like I planned for it to happen that way. Oh, right. Of course, Jonathan said, nodding. Yeah, that's how these things work. One moment, you're opening your door to an ex, and the next thing you know, he's just accidentally living in your house for 4 weeks. Classic mix-up. She sighed. Jonathan, I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react like this. Jonathan gestured vaguely at the universe. Oh, my bad. Clearly, the problem here isn't that you let your ex-husband set up shop in our home. It's my reaction. Of course. Emma pinched the bridge of her nose like she was the one suffering. Jonathan, you're making this into a bigger deal than it is. Jonathan took a slow, deep breath, because apparently, counting to 10 was a thing he needed to start doing now. All right, let's break this down, just so we're on the same page. 1. You were married before, which I didn't know. 2. That ex-husband of yours is back in town, which I also didn't know. And 3. Just to really drive this one home, he lived here, under my roof, while I was still paying for it, and I didn't know that either. Am I missing anything, Emma? Because if I am, I'd love to get all the disasters out of the way at once. Emma pressed her lips together. Jonathan squinted at her. Oh, no, he muttered, realization sinking in like a brick to the face. Oh, no. Emma immediately looked away, and that was all the confirmation he needed. Jonathan pointed at her. There's more, isn't there? She didn't answer. Jonathan groaned. Emma, what else? Emma shifted uncomfortably. It's not. What else? She sighed. Fine. He might have used your office. Jonathan stared at her. My office. She winced. He needed a quiet place to work. Jonathan dragged his hands down his face, because apparently he needed a new way to express absolute disbelief. So let me get this straight. Not only was your ex-husband secretly living here, but he was also sitting in my chair, at my desk, using my computer. Emma hesitated. Jonathan pointed at her again. Emma, did he use my computer? She exhaled slowly. He, might have logged in once or twice. Jonathan inhaled sharply. You let your ex-husband access my work computer? Do you understand how many security protocols that violates? Do you understand that I have emails, files, and contracts on there? He didn't mess with anything. Emma snapped. Oh, good. I'm so relieved. I was really worried there for a second, but now that you've personally assured me that my privacy wasn't invaded, I feel so much better. She scowled. Jonathan, can you stop with the sarcasm? No. Jonathan yelled. Because sarcasm is the only thing keeping me from screaming into the void right now. Emma groaned, rubbing her temples. You are being ridiculous. Jonathan let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh, am I? Because I think what's ridiculous is that I apparently had a roommate and didn't know about it. He wasn't your roommate. Oh, I beg to differ. A man who eats, sleeps, and works under my roof for a month without paying rent? That sounds a lot like a roommate, Emma. She threw up her hands. Jonathan, he had nowhere else to go. Oh, well, in that case, let's open a homeless shelter while we're at it. Maybe I should set up bunk beds in the garage, huh? Get a sign for the front door. Welcome to Jonathan's House of Charity, where your relationship status with my wife determines how many nights you stay for free. Emma clenched her jaw. It was temporary. A month is not temporary, Emma. That's long-term residency. She groaned. I cannot deal with this right now. Jonathan let out another dry laugh. Oh, you can't deal with it? You? That's amazing. Really, I'm in awe. Tell me, what part of this is hard for you, Emma? The part where you lied? The part where your ex was walking around my house in his socks? The part where... She suddenly turned away. I don't have to listen to this. Jonathan threw his hands up. Oh, of course. Just walk away. That's perfect. You've already hidden an entire human being in this house. Why not just hide from this conversation too? Emma stopped, her back still to him. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, without turning around, she muttered, I didn't hide him. Jonathan tilted his head, narrowing his eyes. Excuse me. Emma took a slow breath, finally facing him again. And this time, There was something different in her expression, something unreadable. I didn't hide him, she repeated. You just didn't notice. Jonathan froze. The room suddenly felt different, like the air had shifted. Emma crossed her arms. You think this is all on me? You think I schemed to keep this from you? No, Jonathan. I just didn't say anything. And you? You never noticed. Not once. Jonathan felt his mouth go dry. What are you saying? She lifted her chin slightly. I'm saying, for a month, another man was living in our house, using our space, moving around. And you were so busy with work, so busy with your routines, that you never once stopped to question it. Jonathan's stomach twisted. Emma gave him a knowing look. So maybe, she said quietly, this isn't just about me. Jonathan didn't respond. He couldn't respond. Because for the first time since this entire conversation started, since he found that stupid wedding dress in the basement, he wasn't sure if he was completely right anymore. And that was almost worse than everything else. Jonathan had been called a lot of things in his life. Stubborn, definitely. A bit of a pessimist, sure. His boss once described him as having the charm of a malfunctioning self-checkout machine, which he found both unnecessarily harsh and strangely accurate. But oblivious? That one was new. Yet there he was, standing in his own basement, listening to his wife explain that her ex-husband had been living under his roof for a month, and somehow he hadn't noticed. Jonathan dragged a hand down his face, his mind working overtime to process the sheer stupidity of what he was hearing. So let me get this straight, he said slowly. You're telling me that I'm the problem here? Because I didn't. What? Pick up on the fact that there was a whole extra person in my house? I'm sorry, Emma, but most people don't think to check behind the shower curtain every morning to see if some guest has moved in overnight. Emma exhaled, crossing her arms. That's not what I meant. Jonathan pointed at her. No, please, let's clarify. Because what I'm hearing is that this is my fault. Not because you lied. Not because you hid your ex in our house. But because I was too focused on work to notice the signs. Is that right? She hesitated, then sighed. I'm saying it wasn't some massive deception, Jonathan. I just didn't bring it up. Jonathan laughed, the kind of laugh that didn't sound particularly sane. Oh, well in that case, that's completely different. Not bringing something up is totally normal behavior when it comes to allowing past husbands to live in our house rent-free. Emma rubbed her forehead. Can you just listen for a second? Oh, I'm listening, Jonathan said. I'm listening so hard right now. I am the world's best listener. I just happen to also be the world's most furious listener. She shot him a glare. I didn't do anything wrong. Jonathan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then very calmly said, Emma, I want you to take a moment and really think about what just came out of your mouth. And then, if possible, try saying it again with a straight face. She threw up her hands. Oh, come on, Jonathan. It's not like I was sneaking around behind your back. Jonathan blinked. Emma, or having some grand affair. Emma, I was just helping someone out. Jonathan took a slow, deep breath. Emma, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to stop talking for exactly 30 seconds, because every single word you say is making me want to launch myself into the sun. She rolled her eyes, looking up at the ceiling like she was the one dealing with an unreasonable person. You're overreacting. Jonathan let out a hollow laugh. Oh, I love when people say that. You're overreacting. Right. Because finding out your wife secretly housed her ex-husband for a month is definitely something most people would just shrug off. She groaned. I was trying to do the right thing. Jonathan threw up his hands. By lying to me? I didn't lie to you. Oh, my bad. You just chose not to disclose. Totally different thing. Emma glared at him. I didn't owe you an explanation for something that wasn't a big deal. Jonathan stared at her, something inside him finally snapping into place. He took a step back, crossing his arms. Okay. Emma blinked. Okay. Yeah, he said, nodding. You're right. You didn't owe me an explanation. You didn't owe me anything. Emma frowned. Jonathan. No, really. I see it now. This wasn't about lying. This wasn't about secrecy. This was just about you making a decision that you felt didn't need my input. He tilted his head. Which means I can do the same, right? She hesitated. Jonathan, what are you? No, Emma, he interrupted. You don't get to question me now. Because you set the rules. You don't owe me an explanation? Great. Then I don't owe you one either. And with that, Jonathan turned around and walked out of the basement. Emma didn't follow. Smart move. Jonathan made it upstairs, his mind racing at a speed that was definitely not healthy. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't some oops, my bad situation. This was a choice. Emma had made a conscious decision to do something behind his back, knowing full well how he would react. And that meant she had already decided his feelings didn't matter. Fine. Two could play that game. Jonathan grabbed his phone, his heart pounding as he scrolled through his contacts. He had never been the revenge type, but this wasn't just about getting back at Emma. This was about balance. If she could make major decisions without his input, then he could do the same. He found the number he was looking for and hit call. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Jonathan? Wow, didn't expect to hear from you. What's up? Jonathan smirked, a plan already forming. Hey, man, got a quick question for you. How do you feel about moving in for a bit? Silence. Then, excuse me. Jonathan grinned. Yeah, just for a month or so. No big deal. Apparently, we're running a free housing program at my place, and I figured, hey, why not extend the invitation? His friend hesitated. Jonathan, you do realize I still hate Emma, right? Jonathan leaned back against the couch, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Oh, buddy, trust me. That's exactly the point. Jonathan had never been the kind of guy to hold a grudge. He let things go. He moved on. He understood that people made mistakes. But this was not a mistake. This was an intentional act of disrespect, and if Emma thought for a second that she could just get away with it, she was about to be very, very disappointed. Because Jonathan was about to introduce her to something she clearly wasn't familiar with, consequences. The plan came together quickly, faster than he expected, really. It turned out that when you had a wife who blatantly disregarded your marriage, it wasn't hard to find people willing to help you return the favor. And the best person for the job? Emma's sister, Rachel. Jonathan had never been particularly close with Rachel, mostly because she and Emma had very different personalities. Where Emma was calculated and careful, Rachel was chaotic and loud. She was the kind of person who changed jobs every 6 months and still somehow always landed on her feet. She was also, conveniently, the kind of person who really didn't like being lied to. So when Jonathan called her up and explained the situation, leaving out none of the details, Rachel's reaction was beautiful. She did what? She shrieked into the phone. Jonathan smirked. Oh yeah, just opened our home like it was a bed and breakfast for ex-husbands. There was a long pause. Then, in a much calmer tone, Rachel said, So, when do we start? Jonathan leaned back, satisfied. Tomorrow. Emma was already in a bad mood when Jonathan walked into the kitchen the next morning. She was standing at the counter, aggressively stirring her coffee in a way that suggested the spoon had personally wronged her. Jonathan grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the fridge. Something wrong. Emma shot him a look. You know exactly what's wrong. Jonathan made a thoughtful expression. Do I, though? She scoffed, setting her spoon down with way too much force. You invited Rachel to move in? Jonathan sipped his water, pretending to think. Move in? No, that's not right. I believe the exact wording was stay for a while. But hey, you're the expert in letting people stay here without asking me first. So tell me, is there a specific timeline I should be following? Or do we just let her crash here indefinitely? Emma's nostrils flared. This isn't funny, Jonathan. Oh, I beg to differ, he said, grinning. I think it's hilarious. She let out a frustrated sigh. Rachel is a nightmare to live with. Jonathan nodded. Yeah, that's what I hear. But you know what? I figured we should help her out. Like you helped out your ex. Emma glared. You're being petty. Jonathan set his glass down. No, Emma. Petty would be swapping out all the light bulbs in the house with dim ones, so you have to live in permanent mood lighting. Petty would be secretly adjusting the thermostat by 1 degree every day until you lost your mind. This is justice. Emma clenched her jaw. How long is she staying? Jonathan shrugged. No clue. But hey, you didn't think I needed a say in who stays in my house, so I figured I'd return the favor. Before Emma could respond, the front door burst open, and Rachel strode in like she owned the place. She had a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a devilish grin on her face. Ah, home sweet home, she announced dramatically, dropping her bag onto the floor. Emma closed her eyes like she was praying for patience. Rachel. Rachel clapped her hands together. All right, first things first. Which room is mine? Because I was thinking of taking yours, but that seems a little rude, so I guess I'll settle for the guest room. Emma pinched the bridge of her nose. Rachel, can we talk? Oh, and just a heads up, Rachel continued, ignoring her. I may have invited a few friends over for a game night later. You know, since we're all about letting people stay over now. Jonathan had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. Emma turned to Jonathan, her expression deadly. Fix this. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Oh, but you didn't have to fix your situation. She took a slow, deep breath. Jonathan. He grinned. Emma. Rachel plopped down onto the couch and stretched out. Wow. It's so nice to be in a place where people are so generous with their space. Emma let out a noise that sounded like she wanted to scream. Jonathan leaned against the counter, enjoying every second of this. Oh, Emma. You were right. She shot him a glare. Right about what? He smirked. This really isn't a big deal. Rachel didn't make things easy for Emma. She was loud. She was messy. She invited people over constantly. She took long showers and used up all the hot water. She left her shoes in the middle of the hallway and her coffee cups on every available surface. Emma hated it. And Jonathan? Jonathan had never had more fun in his life. But eventually, after a few weeks of chaos, Emma finally snapped. She cornered Jonathan in the living room, her arms crossed. Rachel needs to leave. Jonathan pretended to be shocked. Oh, really? But I thought we were helping people out. Emma gritted her teeth. Enough, Jonathan. He set his drink down. You want her gone? Yes. He nodded. All right. Then I want him gone. Emma hesitated. Him. Jonathan tilted his head. Oh, come on, Emma. Don't play moron. You know exactly who I'm talking about. She looked away. He's already gone. Gone from the house, Jonathan corrected. But not from your life. She stiffened. That's not fair. Jonathan leaned forward. No, Emma. What wasn't fair was you bringing him into our home, using my space, disrespecting our marriage. You didn't think I'd find out. You didn't care how I'd feel. And now? Now, I don't care how you feel. She swallowed. So what do you want? Jonathan stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, grabbed his car keys, and walked toward the door. Emma frowned. Where are you going? He glanced back. To fix my mistake. Emma blinked. What mistake? Jonathan smirked. Marrying you. And with that, he walked out, leaving Emma alone in the mess she had created. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel